Okay, so I've been lurking on this sub for a while, reading everyone's. I did something terrible and here's how it went. Stories, and I guess it's finally time I share mine. I'm not proud of it. Hell, sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it. But it's part of who I am, and maybe if I get it out, I can make some sense of it. I was deep into the streets at 19. Not just hanging out with a gang, I was the gang, or at least I thought I was. Violence, loyalty, the adrenaline, the sense that I mattered, it was intoxicating. But underneath it all, I was terrified. Terrified of being weak, terrified of being invisible, terrified that if I didn't prove myself, I'd be eaten alive by the people I called my family. That's how I ended up in a situation I never imagined myself in, planning a robbery. Not a small one, not a petty grab, but something that made my stomach churn every time I thought about it. Money was tight, tempers were short, and our crew needed to make a statement. We weren't just trying to get rich, we were trying to carve our name into the street, to make people respect us, to survive. I remember standing in the alley behind the corner store, my hoodie pulled tight, hands shaking, thinking, I can't back out now. If I do, I'm done. They'll eat me alive. That fear was as much a motivator as the cash. And that's where it all started, me convincing myself that crossing the line was the only way to stay alive and relevant. Once the idea was out there, it stopped being hypothetical real fast. That's the thing about gangs, someone says something reckless, and instead of sanity shutting it down, everyone starts building on it. Suddenly it's not if but how. We picked the place because it was familiar. Too familiar, honestly. A small neighborhood liquor store a few blocks from where I grew up. I knew the owner's habits, knew when the place was slow, knew which nights his nephew worked the register instead of him. That knowledge should have stopped me. Instead, I treated it like an advantage, like I was being smart instead of cruel. I told myself this wasn't personal. I told myself they had insurance, that no one would get hurt, that this was just business. That's how I justified being the one to plan it. I sketched out times in my head, counted seconds between customers, watched the store for days like a creep pretending to be a regular. Bought cheap beer I didn't even want just so I could see where the cameras were pointed. We agreed on roles. No freelancing, no heroics. In theory, it was supposed to be clean. In reality, none of us had done something like this before, and that made it worse. I could see the nerves in everyone else, which somehow made me feel like I had to be the calm one, even though my chest felt like it was vibrating. The night before, I barely slept. I kept replaying it over and over in my head, changing little details, convincing myself preparation meant control. That if I thought through every possible angle, nothing could go wrong. I didn't realize then how stupid that belief was. The day of the job felt unreal, like I was watching my own life from a few feet behind my eyes. I went through my normal routine on purpose, showered, ate, even joked with my mom like nothing was wrong. That part messes with me the most now, how easy it was to lie just by acting normal. I laid everything out on my bed like I'd seen in movies, dark hoodie, gloves, a cheap mask I hated because it smelled like plastic, and the gun. That last part is important. It wasn't even mine. It was passed around the crew like some cursed object, and I remember staring at it thinking, I don't even know how to use this thing properly. I kept telling myself it was just for intimidation. A prop. Something to make people comply so nobody got hurt. We went over the plan again in the car. Same words, same reassurances. In and out. Less than 2 minutes. I was supposed to be the one giving signals, calling abort if anything felt off. Funny how I believed I'd have the clarity to do that once adrenaline kicked in. My hands wouldn't stop sweating. I wiped them on my jeans over and over, trying to ground myself. One of the guys laughed, and said I looked pale. I laughed back, because that's what you do. You don't admit fear out loud. Fear makes you expendable. When we parked, everything went quiet inside me. No big dramatic moment, no last-second wisdom. Just this heavy stillness, like I'd already accepted whatever came next. I pulled the mask over my face, took one last breath, and opened the car door. That was the moment I crossed from planning into doing, and there was no undo button after that. Stepping out of the car felt like stepping into a different world. The street looked the same as always, trash in the gutter, flickering streetlights, the faint smell of fried food from a nearby diner, but to me, it was a stage. Every sound felt amplified, my boots against the cracked pavement, the distant siren somewhere far off, my own heartbeat hammering like a drum. We approached the store from the side alley. That's when I realized how small the space was, how exposed we were if someone happened to be watching. My stomach dropped, but I tried to swallow it down, pretending like the jitters were just part of the plan. I kept scanning for cameras, for neighbors at windows, for anything that could screw us before we even walked through the door. The guy who was supposed to be my backup kept fidgeting behind me, shoving his hands into his pockets like he wasn't sure if we'd make it out alive. That's when the fear hit me fully. I wasn't just anxious anymore. I was scared in the primal way that makes your teeth ache, and your stomach tie itself in knots. I remember whispering to myself, like I could will the situation into calm, this is just a job. Don't fuck it up. Don't fuck it up. And then we reached the corner, and the door loomed in front of me like it knew what we were about to do. I pushed it open, and that's when the world went from tense to chaotic. The door creaked open, and that tiny bell above it sounded like a gunshot in my ears. Inside, the store smelled like old beer, cigarettes, and something sweet, candy maybe, but all I could focus on was the counter, the cash register, the clerk. He looked up and froze, like a deer caught in headlights. I raised my hand and pointed the gun, I mean, not to shoot yet, just to make him know. I'd imagined this 100 times, but in real life it felt wrong in a way I couldn't have predicted. Easy, I said, voice shaking more than I wanted. Empty the register. The kid behind the counter fumbled with the till. My backup was standing off to the side, doing that nervous foot shuffle, whispering shit like hurry up. The seconds stretched. Every little sound, crack of a gum wrapper, hum of the fridge, felt deafening. Then it happened. A customer I hadn't noticed walked in from the other side. I froze. They froze. For a moment, it was like the world stopped moving. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. Get down! I barked, though my voice cracked. The person hit the floor like a ragdoll. My crew shot me looks, wide-eyed. I realized then that no amount of planning could prepare you for real human reactions. The clerk finally got the register open, throwing bills into the bag like his life depended on it, which, technically, it did. I snatched it, my hands shaking, aware of how fast my pulse was racing. Every instinct screamed, this is wrong. Stop. But I couldn't. And just like that, the plan was in motion, but the chaos had only just begun. No plan survives first contact with reality. That's what they say, and I learned it in the worst way possible that night. As I turned to leave, bag in hand, one of the crew members panicked. He knocked over a display of energy drinks, cans rolling everywhere with loud metallic clatters. The customer on the floor let out a scream, the clerk yelled something I couldn't even understand. I froze for a split second, long enough for me to realize that all our careful timing had evaporated. Then the clerk grabbed the phone behind the counter. My stomach sank. I lunged forward, slamming my hand on the counter, yelling for him to hang up the damn phone. He hesitated, just a fraction too long, and in that moment, I saw the fear in his eyes turn into defiance. Somewhere in the chaos, my backup tripped over a stack of magazines, hitting the floor hard. I barely had time to help him up before the front door opened again. Another customer. Another problem. I could feel sweat running down my back, mixing with the adrenaline so thick in my veins I could barely think straight. I remember thinking, we're screwed. This is it. And yet, somehow, the bag was still in my hands. Somehow, we were still moving, still trying to make it out alive. That's when I realized that planning only takes you so far. After that, it's instinct, luck, and sheer will. The worst part? Even in the chaos, part of me was exhilarated. My chest was pounding, my hands shaking, and my mind screaming, "This is insane," but there was a perverse thrill in being in total control of a situation I knew I shouldn't be in. We burst out the front door, and the cool night air hit me like a slap. For a moment, it felt like freedom, like maybe we'd actually pulled it off. But that feeling didn't last. The street was quieter than I expected. Too quiet. My backup was swearing under his breath, fumbling with the car keys. I could feel the cash bag bouncing against my leg with every step, reminding me that this was real, that someone could get hurt if we messed up now. I glanced back. The clerk was on the phone, pointing, yelling. I didn't even have to think, my body reacted before my brain could catch up. We sprinted to the car, throwing ourselves in. I slammed the door, engine roared, and we peeled out of the lot like it was a movie scene. But then it happened, the unmistakable sound of sirens. My heart stopped. No planning, no prep, no rehearsed signals could prepare me for that. I could feel every muscle in my body tighten, every instinct screaming at me to go faster, to get away. The car jerked around corners, tires screeching, and for a few terrifying minutes, it was just us against the world. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes wide, face pale, adrenaline making my vision sharp but my thoughts scrambled. I realized something horrifying: even if we made it, nothing would ever feel normal again. And deep down, I knew, I wasn't just running from the cops. I was running from myself. We ditched the car a few blocks from the neighborhood, smashed taillight, tire smoke still lingering. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow pit in my stomach that felt heavier than any bag of stolen cash. Back at my apartment, I collapsed on the bed, sweaty, trembling, staring at the ceiling. The bag was next to me, full of crumpled bills that suddenly felt meaningless. I couldn't stop replaying every second, the clerk's terrified face, the kid on the floor screaming, my crew stumbling around like amateurs. My chest felt tight, like it was trying to warn me, you did something you can't undo. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every little sound, sirens, distant barking dogs, footsteps in the hall, made me jump. Even the phone made me flinch. I kept thinking, what if someone saw us? What if they called the cops? But the worst part wasn't fear of getting caught. It was the guilt gnawing at me, the way my own mind wouldn't let me escape. I had crossed the line. I had hurt people, terrified people, and for what? Some cash, some reputation, some false sense of belonging. I spent hours just staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, wondering if I could ever feel normal again. That night, I learned that crime doesn't end when the plan does. It lingers in your chest, in your thoughts, in every restless night. The next morning, reality hit harder than the night before. News spread fast in our neighborhood. Someone always talks, always snitches, even if they're just gossiping. By noon, I was already hearing whispers, seeing eyes that lingered too long. People weren't just scared of me, they were scared of what I'd done. Then came the unexpected. One of the crew members we trusted most started acting weird. Texts ignored, calls not returned. Later, I found out he'd shown off the money to a few friends. I panicked, not just about the cash being traced, but about the fact that our tight-knit gang could crumble because of greed and stupidity. And there was the clerk. I kept replaying his terrified face in my head, wondering if he recognized me, if he'd tell the cops. Every time I walked down the street, every glance from a neighbor felt like an accusation. The paranoia was suffocating. Even worse, I realized the robbery hadn't made me fearless, it had made me brittle. I was hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow, every conversation that could be about me. My own crew started blaming each other for mistakes I barely noticed in the moment, and arguments turned violent fast. Loyalty, the thing I'd feared losing the most, suddenly felt conditional. That's when I understood the hardest lesson: the consequences aren't just legal. They're emotional, psychological, and almost impossible to escape. By that point, my emotions were a mess I couldn't untangle. Fear, guilt, adrenaline, and a strange, twisted thrill all mingled together like gasoline on a fire. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again: the kid on the floor, the clerk fumbling, the cans rolling across the floor. I hated myself for it, but part of me also felt alive. I couldn't stop replaying the robbery in my head, over and over. Not like a memory, but like a highlight reel, each mistake and panic moment amplified. I kept thinking about what ifs. What if someone had been hurt? What if the cops had shown up 5 minutes earlier? Every scenario was worse than the last. And yet, there was that rush. That dangerous, stupid thrill of knowing I had crossed a line that most people never even approach. It made me feel powerful and invincible, even as I knew I was walking a razor's edge. Sleep was impossible. I'd wake in the middle of the night sweating, heart hammering, thinking I heard sirens outside or someone at my door. Even when I convinced myself it was nothing, my body didn't believe it. I started avoiding people, avoiding mirrors, avoiding my own reflection because seeing myself reminded me of what I'd done. The line between fear and excitement blurred so much that I couldn't tell if I wanted to get caught or keep running. After a few days of spiraling, I caught myself trying to explain it away. It wasn't that bad, I told myself. Nobody got hurt. It was survival. It was loyalty. I even tried convincing my crew that we did the right thing, that we earned our place on the streets. But every time I said it, a little voice inside me whispered bullshit. I started avoiding anyone who might pry too much: friends, family, even my own gang when possible. I lied constantly. When my mom asked why I was jumpy, why I was so quiet, I blamed stress, school, life. That was easier than telling the truth, that I'd pointed a gun at someone, scared the hell out of a kid, and made a mess of my life in less than 10 minutes. I rationalized the robbery as just business, but deep down, I knew that was a lie I was telling myself. That lie made me feel numb at first, like I could survive this without breaking. But the more I told it, the more it ate at me. I started snapping at friends over nothing, drinking too much, pacing the apartment for hours. Loyalty, something I feared losing, suddenly felt like a trap. Everyone in the crew was watching, judging, waiting for the next mistake. And me? I was waiting for the guilt to hit me like a train. It didn't matter how I rationalized it, the fear, the adrenaline, the shame, they were always right there, lurking behind my every thought. A week after the robbery, I realized I wasn't just nervous, I was being hunted by my own paranoia. Every siren made me jump. Every knock on the door made my stomach flip. I couldn't sit still, couldn't focus. I felt like the walls were closing in. Then came the call that really shook me. One of the neighbors had seen the crew running from the store and called the cops. It wasn't a full-on bust yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they started asking questions. My chest tightened like I'd swallowed a brick. I had always imagined getting caught as something dramatic, like in the movies, flashy, terrifying, but this was worse. This was slow, creeping, and relentless. I started imagining every possible scenario: cops at the door, my crew snitching, the clerk pointing me out. I couldn't tell who I could trust anymore. Even the people I thought were loyal now seemed like threats. I remember pacing my tiny apartment for hours, checking the locks, staring at the windows, convinced that at any second someone would come for me. And through it all, the guilt didn't let up. I wasn't just scared of the law, I was scared of myself. Of what I'd done, what I was capable of. I realized that crossing that line didn't just change my life externally, it changed me internally, in ways I couldn't fix. By the second week after the robbery, I couldn't escape myself. Fear, guilt, and adrenaline weren't separate anymore, they were fused into this constant, gnawing presence. Every reflection in a window, every shadow, every passing stranger made me flinch. I felt hunted, not just by the cops or the crew, but by my own conscience. I started replaying the robbery in slow motion, obsessively. I saw every mistake, every scream, every scared face. I hated myself for the thrill I'd felt, hated that a part of me craved the danger, hated that I could justify it in my own head while knowing it was wrong. Sleep became a rare commodity. When I did manage to drift off, I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. My hands shook constantly, my stomach a knot I couldn't undo. I realized something terrifying. I didn't just fear getting caught, I feared what I'd become. Even with my crew, I felt distant. Conversations felt heavy with unspoken tension. No one admitted their fear or guilt, but I could see it in their eyes. Everyone was wearing a mask, just like I was, pretending everything was fine while the whole world had shifted. I started thinking about the long term for the first time. Not about the money, not about reputation, but about the person I was turning into. And that scared me more than anything else. In the end, I didn't get caught. Not that night, not the next week, not ever, at least not directly. The cops investigated, asked questions, questioned my crew, but somehow, through luck, timing, or incompetence, I walked away. The cash was spent in small doses, laundered through petty transactions, never enough to draw attention. On paper, it looked like we'd gotten away clean. But the truth was, nothing felt clean anymore. I couldn't look in the mirror without seeing that scared, adrenaline-fueled version of myself staring back. I couldn't sit in a quiet room without replaying the screams, the shouting, the chaos. Freedom didn't feel like freedom, it felt like a weight I carried everywhere. Even with my crew, things were different. Loyalty had a price, and we'd all paid it in ways we didn't fully understand. Arguments were sharper, trust was thinner, and every small interaction carried the tension of unspoken truths. I had survived, but at what cost? My sense of invincibility had vanished, replaced with this constant hum of anxiety and guilt. I realized then that the real crime wasn't the robbery itself, it was what it did to me, how it reshaped my world, my mind, and my soul. I had crossed the line, and even if no one else saw it, I could never go back. Looking back now, I can see the full weight of what I did. At the time, I told myself it was survival, loyalty, making a name for myself. But the truth? It was fear, fear of being weak, invisible, irrelevant, that drove me. And that fear doesn't go away just because the cops never caught you. It sticks, digs in, and reminds you every day of the person you became in that moment. I've learned that the adrenaline, the thrill, the so-called power of crossing that line, it's temporary. It fades fast, leaving only guilt, paranoia, and a hollow ache that nothing can fill. I've learned that loyalty in the streets can be a trap, and that fear can make you do things you'll regret forever. If I could warn someone, I'd say this: don't do it. Don't think you're clever enough to escape consequences. Don't convince yourself it's just business. The people you hurt, the lines you cross, the fear you feel, those things don't disappear, even if the law never touches you. I can't undo what I did. I can't erase the faces I scared, or the panic I caused. But I can tell my story honestly, hoping someone out there will pause before stepping over a line that can't be uncrossed. For me, the lesson is simple but brutal: survival isn't worth becoming the kind of person you're ashamed of.